Welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Andrew Lawton. So Andrew is the host of the Andrew Lawton Show. Great name. Also has his own Substack, and he's a columnist for True North. And in addition to that, he's also from London, Ontario. So always nice to have a guest from the local area. So Andrew, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, really excited to chat with you today. You've been super, active on your Twitter lately, where I follow you, and I know that you were recently at the truckers convoy. So maybe we'll kind of get started there. So, what did you see over the weekend when you were there, and what are your kind of initial thoughts on it?
Well, it was cold. It was very, very cold, which I think is something that actually makes the point of just how dedicated people were being out there. And I don't know, minus like 72 or whatever it felt like at any given point. But in all honesty, and some people that have decided they hate this and have decided they're against it politically won't want to accept this. But the tone and the feeling were very much about it just being a big block party. People were singing, people were dancing, people had barbecues on the back of their trucks and were cooking up food, and it really just felt like a celebration. And I'm someone that throughout the course of the pandemic has gotten increasingly pessimistic about the state of things. But yesterday, or I guess last weekend when I was there, it really just felt hopeful. People felt like they were turning a page on all of these things. And obviously, there have been a couple of isolated incidents that have been less than desirable, and we can talk about those if you want. But generally, it was a really positive, optimistic vibe, and very loud. Very, very loud. I just did a couple of days of the horns going off. I know other people are still sticking with it if they live in Ottawa, but that's been very much the tenor and tone of things in Ottawa.
Yeah, I can only imagine how cold it was there those days. I mean, I basically, I've been running from my house to get to my car, even just a few steps. It's been so cold outside. So, kudos to all the people who've been, sticking it out there. They must be super tough people. It must, really, really shows, like you said, that they really believe in what they're standing up for. And it sounds too like, there's sort of like this sense of like community and unity amongst, again, at least 99% of like the protesters. That's what, people have basically been telling me, is that everyone there has been, really supporting one another. They're all about the unity. They're not, about division in any way. And is that sort of, again, kind of what you sort of, what you felt there when you were there?
I think so. The one thing that I would note is that there was a very bizarre coalition of people that were there, because, again, there's a lot of folks who would want to malign this as just being some radical far-right rally, but a lot of people on the political left that were there. One woman I spoke to who had a sign that said, "Fully vaccinated, Black, Indigenous person of color, pro-choice." Because she was, again, just there because she opposed vaccine mandates. And then you have other people that are like the redneck, rough around the edges, blue collar folks that may be very conservative, but they were all uniting under a single banner. A lot of Indigenous people, they were there because they're against vaccine mandates, but also for a lot of them because they just are against the government of the day. They were saying, listen, this is a government that has used us, that has held us up as symbols, but hasn't delivered clean drinking water. They were joining forces with the truckers. And you had a lot of French Canadians. Quebec has been very aggressive on COVID response measures. So a lot of Quebecers who don't normally join protests with English Canadians and join in with English Canadian protest movements or political movements, they were all there. So you can't just distill this down to one dimension. And that's where I'd say a lot of the media coverage is getting this protest wrong. It's just not really seeing the diversity of approaches within this movement.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, and that's actually even news to me. I mean, I know that a lot of people are there, mostly protesting vaccine mandates, and I think that's kind of how this got started. And again, I just want to reiterate that we're not against vaccines; we are against vaccine mandates. But just coming back to your point, so like I was under the impression again that it was more of an anti-vaccine mandate kind of movement, but it seems like in general it's more of like an anti-government movement. So it's very interesting to hear you talk about, Indigenous people talking about how they don't have clean drinking water, and I can see how this is potentially blowing up into something bigger than what it started, and how more issues may actually be solved in addition to COVID issues, which seems very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, I get the point there. I don't think I would call it an anti-government movement by and large. I think the problem is that, or not the problem, maybe it's the benefit of it to some people, but in a grassroots movement, you can never control what your protest means to people who join, and you can never
Yeah.
have a single narrative. This isn't a political party. There's no official Freedom Convoy website that has a statement of principles and what we stand for that everyone who's there has to agree with. And the one thing we see is that to a lot of people, they may show up because to them it means something else. And similarly to critics, I don't know if you did well, you would have had to have done like a psych rotation in med school, but like to a lot of people, this is just a Rorschach. You look at it and all you see is whatever was already in your mind in general. All you see is whatever you want to project onto it, for better or for worse. So a lot of people, and we see this in a lot of left-wing protests, back in the days of like Occupy and Idle No More, all of these different groups would be at the same protest, protesting different things. And it was like very difficult actually to see what the protest was actually about at certain points, because so many of these pre-existing grievances were brought there. I don't think it's at that level here, but I do concede there are individual people that are anti-vaccine. There are individual people that are anti-mask. There are others that are just taking the principled libertarian stand that I take, which is, do what you want, but don't force me to do anything. And certainly the organizers' intent has been about ending all COVID restrictions. That's what they've said. They want vaccine passports gone. They want vaccine mandates gone. And in their words, the trucks are staying until those things are all gone across the country.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to see how there's so many different groups there together, and like you said too, I find it's harder now to. I don't really even like the terms left wing and right wing now, because I feel like they've kind of almost like gone out the door. Because you were talking about how there's a lot of like conservative people there, but you're also talking about how there's libertarians there as well, right? And it's like we get caught up, I think, in these left wing and right wing kind of terms, and we don't really realize like how much closer we are together on this issue. Like there's always going to be a few people who are way out on one side that won't really meet in the middle with most people. But I think 80 maybe 90% of Canadians are actually a lot closer in what their thoughts are on vaccines and on COVID than what's being portrayed in the media. And people think that just because someone may be super anti-vaccine, someone may be super anti masking or something like that, these, and someone may be pro those things, that they may not see eye to eye on most issues, but they're just kind of focusing on one or two differences as opposed to all of the similarities. And so did you find that most people there, even though they may have came together for different types of movements, some may be more libertarian, some may be more on the right side, did you feel that overall collectively they were less divided than what is sort of like portrayed in the media?
I think definitely, certainly among the people at the convoy. Now, if you were to take random Ottawa citizen and convoy supporter, I don't know if they're going to have the common ground there, but I do think all the groups were generally getting along. And again, I saw a Christian pastor who was hugging an Indigenous person, and he was doing a service on the Sunday on a flatbed in front of Parliament Hill, and had one of the Indigenous leaders come up and do a traditional Indigenous blessing in her language. I think it was Dene, if memory serves. And again, these are two people that would not normally share a stage together, that have very different religious beliefs, that were working together because they were both part of this movement. And I think your point about the left-right divide no longer being adequate is an incredibly important one, because COVID has really reshaped the political battle lines. We saw this in the last election, and the PPC support. There was a poll, I can't remember who it's from, but that just came out this week, that said the people most likely to support the convoy are PPC supporters, of whom like 90% are pro-convoy. But the second political party whose supporters were most likely to also support the convoy was the Green Party. So
Interesting.
you have what some people would characterize as a fringe or marginal right-wing group versus a fringe or marginal left-wing group that were converging in the largest numbers for this. And I think there's something very telling about that. This is no longer, as you note, a left-right issue.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, like, a couple of years ago, I was called sort of like, a left-wing hippie because I'm so, pro cannabis and, pro psilocybin, that kind of thing. But because of some of the stances I've made on COVID, now people are calling me like alt-right and all this kind of thing, right? So it's like, you got to pick one, like which one am I? And the thing is that you may have an opinion that again, I know we need to get rid of these terms that may traditionally been more associated with the left, then you also may have opinions that have been more traditionally associated with the right. And it doesn't mean that you can't have both, and that you can't just kind of call yourself, you don't even have to say that you're in the middle. You just say that this is what I believe on this issue, and this is what I believe on this issue. And yes, one is more associated with the left and one is more associated with the right. But in general, when you're coming together, you don't have to take one stance and say, oh, I'm completely right and I'm completely left. And I think that's what the media is kind of trying to do. They're trying to create this division, and I don't think that we should be doing that. And I think that's what's creating some of the hostility and some of the violence that is happening. But that being said, Andrew, like we kind of mentioned, it was a very, very peaceful protest for the most part. There are one or two, I guess, like isolated incidences of people doing things that we certainly don't condone in any way. But did you want to speak on those instances at all?
Yeah, I get. I mean, I've said what I have to say about this in the past, but I think it bears repeating that there is no place for Nazi flags at any protest in Canada. That's not saying it's should be illegal, but it's just plain wrong. And I don't get into this whole thing of, well, free speech versus hate speech. The point is, we can talk about things as being morally wrong, and being a supporter of the Nazis is something that should be as unanimous as it's possible to get in Canada. But so far, there's been one photo of one person, or sorry, a couple of photos, but of one person. And that person has been very swiftly and rightfully condemned by the organizers and the convoy supporters. Stupid little things like the adornments on the Terry Fox statue. Again, they were removable, and now everyone's been protecting and honoring Terry Fox. 2 cars parked at the War Memorial, they were removed, and now you've got convoy supporters that are standing guard. So anything that's being held up as representative of the convoy that is negative has itself been denounced by the convoy more vigorously than by anyone else. And I think there's something quite telling in that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it. I think anytime you can police yourself, or basically that kind of term, or anytime you can correct yourself when you see that you're doing something wrong, is obviously something that should be done. And I'm glad that those people did do that, because it makes the convoy much more appealing to people, because obviously, as we've seen in the media, there's a lot of people that are just attacking one or two incidences instead of looking at the entire protest. And I think that's doing people a lot of disservice. And I'm very happy to hear you and other people like yourself say that this protest actually has been peaceful. There's been one or two isolated incidences, and for the most part, the police have not been needed to get involved, and the people at the convoy have been doing the policing themselves. And I think that speaks volumes for the convoy itself and the people who are conducting themselves there. So I'm very, very happy to hear that. So I'm now that we chatted about the convoy a little bit, one thing that I did want to bring up with you, Andrew. So yesterday there was some real big news that came out. Erin O'Toole has been ousted from the PC party. So what were your kind of initial thoughts on that, and were you surprised when you heard it?
I'm not surprised, because when I heard there was going to be a vote, I just was looking at the numbers and looking at the caucus makeup and thinking there's no way he survives this. I am surprised how quickly it took place, because remember, there had been a lot of criticism of Erin O'Toole's performance in the election from certain segments of the Conservative Party after the election. And anytime someone spoke up, it really just fizzled out and didn't get much traction. The most prominent critique came from a Saskatchewan senator that most people outside of conservative politics wouldn't know, Denise Batters. And she tried to launch a petition and it made a big splash. And then no one really joined and said, yeah, I want O'Toole gone as well. Now, I know from talking to a couple of MPs that I know that this was brewing for a little while. But the convoy, just to segue our last topic to this one, was very much the straw that broke the camel's back, because O'Toole had been facing criticism from his caucus for not speaking out clearly, not speaking about issues that conservative Canadians tend to care about. And then when the convoy came and he was asked at a press conference, I think it was exactly 1 week ago, 8 times whether he supported it or not, and couldn't give an answer or wouldn't give an answer. And what you saw in the days following is that all of these prominent MPs started to just go rogue and send out their statements of support for the convoy, take pictures with truckers, start giving coffee to people. And O'Toole ended up reversing his position very well, I guess not reversing, but finding a position and deciding to, in a bit of a lukewarm way, support the convoy. And I think that was, for anyone that was on the fence, a big turning point, because they realized that he's just not the leader that this party wants. And again, I'm not talking about what the left wants or what the media wants, because there are no shortage of proclamations from these folks about what the Conservative Party should be. But as far as what the Conservatives in that party themselves want, he wasn't speaking to those issues. So at a certain point, he just didn't have a mandate to stay on.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I just felt that like he wasn't in opposition. That's kind of my sort of stance on O'Toole, is that he's basically just saying the same thing as Trudeau was. Like, he was never actually a real opposition to him in any way. And the minimal things that he was different on Trudeau, again, they were very, very minimal, and he didn't really speak to them very much. So it's not my, I wasn't surprised that he lost the election, because again, he didn't oppose really anything. And I'm not really surprised, again, that he's been, ousted, just because he's, again, coming back to the media report that you referenced about a week ago. I saw that when he was asked, 8 different times, and just didn't give an answer whatsoever. And I think that people were kind of, fed up with that. So I could see how, this truckers convoy could have been, the straw on the camel's back. So then my next question is, who do you think will be the leader? Because a lot of people are calling for Pierre to come in and lead, but I've heard, I'm not sure if this is true, that he doesn't want to. I think Peter MacKay is also someone who's very, very interested in becoming the leader of this party. So, where do you see the leadership in this party going, Andrew?
I think in a lot of ways, if Pierre Poilievre decides to run, it's his to lose. Like, there was a video that I did yesterday, just a live video with my colleagues at True North, reacting to Erin O'Toole's departure. Well, to put it kindly, I guess departure is the nicer word. But I asked at some point to the panel that we had on, who you think should replace. And 100% of the responses that were just streaming by in the comment section was Pierre Poilievre, Pierre Poilievre, Pierre Poilievre. Yeah. I might have missed like a Leslyn Lewis or an Ed the Sock or whatever, but everyone that I consciously saw was Pierre Poilievre. Now, not that I equate Twitter and YouTube and Facebook comments to real life, but he has name recognition, he has a social media presence, and he's not just an ideologue, he's actually very well organized in politics. He knows a lot of the players. He could assemble a crackerjack team very quickly. But we also know that in 2020, he was very, very close, like days away from announcing, and then pulled back for whatever reason, and ultimately said he wanted to just focus on spending time with his family. Now, he has another child now, so still a young family. Does that still weigh him down, or is this the time he pulls the trigger? If he gets in, I think it's his to lose.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that if he runs, he's definitely going to win. But again, I don't know what's going on in Pierre's head. But I certainly hope that he runs. I think he'd be just a fantastic candidate. I think he's the change that we need in Canada right now. And I think that if he runs, that he will win. So I certainly hope that he does run, but I guess we'll have to see in the coming days. But based upon some of the history that you just mentioned. I don't want to get my hopes up too high, just in case he doesn't want to, take on that burden, so to speak, because it is obviously a very, very difficult job. You got to think about family, like he is as well. And when you're in the media, you're going to be criticized constantly. And that doesn't just take a toll on the person itself, but it takes a toll on the person's family, which is probably why Pierre is sort of considering this position right now. Do you think that Peter MacKay will run, and do you think that he has any shot if with or without Pierre in the running?
So I think he wants to. The issue, one of the issues for Peter MacKay is that, as I understand it, he has still huge amounts of debt from his last campaign, from his leadership run in 2020. And if he wants to fundraise, he has to pay that off and then start racking up a war chest for this campaign. So I'm not saying he won't do it, but I'm saying that last time just did not go well for him. They were spending money left, right, and center. They were fundraising well enough, but not well enough to cover just the huge numbers of consultants and agencies and firms involved. So I don't know. Again, I mean, this is like getting inside baseball, but just organizationally speaking, Peter MacKay would have an uphill battle, but I know he wants it. Obviously, this is a guy who has wanted to be prime minister going back to 2003, when he was the leader of the federal PC party in Canada.
Yeah, I see him definitely wanting to run again, but I didn't know about the debt that he had accumulated from his last election, so that that may deter him from moving forward in this one. So I guess we'll just have to see what happens. But before we kind of branch off this to another topic, anyone else in the PC party do you feel may be a future leader?
I think Leslyn Lewis is one that I don't think she'd win, but I do think she'd be interested in it. She ran for leadership as a relatively unknown in 2020, and her support was actually what pushed Erin O'Toole over the edge to victory, because it was a ranked ballot. So I know she's got a lot of supporters, and certainly she's become, now that she is an elected MP, a well-known name in conservative circles. I think that, the people are going to look at like Rona Ambrose, who was the interim leader previously, and say, does she want to come back in? Because she would have a lot of support from people that are more moderate, but also a lot of people that remember her as a minister in the Harper era. Jason Kenney's a big fan of Rona Ambrose. She's very popular. She's very likable, and she's also been in that role for quite a while. She was interim leader for, I think it was about a year and a half. So she's one that has been bandied about. Had Candice Bergen not become interim leader this week, I would have thought she was a contender, because certainly she is very, very well liked in the party, but as interim, she can't run. And I mean, there are other names of people that could, folks like Michelle Rempel, or Rempel Garner rather. But again, you never know. And if someone big gets in early, I think that will discourage anyone that's on the fence from if they're like, I'm not just, they're going to suck the oxygen out of the room. I'm just not even going to bother. So there is an advantage if you are a Pierre Poilievre or a Peter MacKay to announce early.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And now that they've ousted O'Toole and they're kind of looking at another leader, do you see Maxime Bernier like switching back, or do you think that he's going to keep up with the PPC party? Like, where do you feel like he's going to play into this kind of whole scenario?
So Bernier actually put out a statement on this that I just pulled up here as you were asking this.
Oh,
the subject
excellent.
is, I'm not going anywhere. The answer is very simple: no, never. He says that the party is still morally and intellectually corrupt, and he has no interest in jumping back in there. So anyone hoping that this would be like the grand unifying moment for the CPC and the PPC is sadly not going to get that.
Interesting. So I mean, I know he was very direct when he said this is a corrupt party, but what do you think? Like, what do you think Max's reasons are for not wanting to join the PC party and feeling just like so strongly about it? Because there's a lot of people who when they were voting last time, me being one of them in many ways, thinking like, I wouldn't mind voting for PPC, but I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, but I don't want my vote to not count. So maybe I should just vote PC. So at least, Trudeau doesn't get back in, so like, how do you feel Max is going to handle those types of questions? And do you feel that, he is sort of, and again, I love Max. I think he's great. But do you feel like, the PPC is potentially taking away from some of the PC votes, and that's sort of why, and is assisting anyway, the Liberal Party?
I think there are two things that are working here, and one of them is going to be a somewhat pro PPC idea, and the other is going to be more of an anti PPC idea. So I'll get the hate from both sides on this. I think what's working against Maxime is that he believes that the party infrastructure, the party apparatus, the deep state, if you will, the permanent bureaucracy of the party is the problem. So no matter who's there as a leader, they're not going to be able to root out the rot, so to speak, and that the same forces that conspired against him in 2017 are still going to be there. So that's, I think, the fear that he has, and that he couldn't just come in and win a leadership, and even if he did, he wouldn't be able to do the things that he needs to do. So that's the sympathetic position. The more critical position is that right now, he's the leader of a party that he controls entirely. It's his party. He can draw a salary from the party. He's got support. He's got a bit of celebrity there. And also, I think this is an important point, is that I don't think he admits this, but the PPC has a lot of support from people that are not just principled dissident conservatives. When I was covering the PPC campaign in the last election in September, I was meeting like former Green Party supporters, people that had never voted, that saw something in the PPC. And so it's not fair to say it's an entirely conservative party, which means that if he were to try to transition that support back into the conservatives, there are a lot of PPC supporters that want no part of that and never would, even if Bernier were the leader.
Very, very interesting. And it kind of, reminds me of our conversation earlier about how, at the truckers convoy, you said that, the most supported party there would have been the PPC, but then the second most supported party there would have been the Green Party. So it's ironic to think that, if someone is a Green Party and they're, thinking about moving a little bit more conservative or something like that, then maybe they'll move to NDP or Liberal. But it seems like there's definitely people in the PPC party who have conservative views, but there's also people there that have more like libertarian style views, which would be more considered to be to the left. So I can understand how it's not just a slam dunk that, like, if you're not voting PPC, you're definitely going to vote PC or vice versa.
Yeah, and there are also, I would add, people that just like being on the outside, people that don't want to be part of a mainstream party or a mainstream political movement, the people that would kind of just say you were a sellout if you were to go into the mainstream. And I think that's probably something we've seen in certain types of music as well, where, once you go mainstream, oh yeah, you're a sellout, I want nothing to do with you. And I think there's a lot of that in the PPC support base.
Yeah. So what do you think Max would have to do? And I mean, I'm sure he'd like to know the answer to this question too, but what do you think he would have to do in the next election to maybe, gain more support? Because, I know that I think they did triple their support last election, but it's still like less than 1%, wasn't it? Like 0.6% of the vote or something like that.
No, it was quite a bit more than that this time.
Okay.
It was quite a bit. I forget the number, but I think it was close to 5%, like 4.8 or something, that the PPC got. But of course, that translates into 0 seats because of the distribution. I think the PPC's success this time around was in part because it was no longer a new party, so they had some time to build, but also circumstantially, the pandemic provided a significant opportunity because none of the mainstream party leaders were taking up the issues. None of them were talking about lockdowns, vaccine passports, vaccine mandates. So Bernier became really the lone leader on that issue, which helped him tremendously. I think what Bernier needs is something like that, or that issue that he can kind of claim as his own. And I think he also needs a weak conservative leader. If Pierre Poilievre, who a lot of PPC supporters tend to like, were the leader of the Conservatives, I do think that would be very threatening to Bernier's momentum, because then, as you note, a lot of people that say, well, I don't want to vote for a party that's never elected anyone. Pierre's better than Erin O'Toole was. Maybe I just vote Conservative. So I think he needs a really weak conservative leader.
Yeah, and one thing that I think that Pierre has going for him as well, and there's definitely a big cryptocurrency movement going on, is that he's been, very he's advocated for cryptos significantly, and there are a lot of people who are into cryptocurrencies now, particularly into Bitcoin. That's really the only one that I'm into, and I feel that those people, there's a lot of people who are into that, who had ideas and wanted to support Max and probably did vote for Max. But if they see Pierre, I can see those people voting for Pierre if he does decide indeed to run, because again, he's been very vocal about the borrowing of money. He's been very vocal about putting money into Bitcoin, into cryptocurrencies, and I think that's where there may be a little bit of or one area anyway, where people may decide to vote PC this time as opposed to PPC, just because of that one lone issue, that one issue regarding cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's an area that I just don't consider myself an expert in by any stretch. But I do think that Pierre Poilievre has done a good job at not just talking about the economic issues, which tends to be the shortcoming, I think, for conservatives. They only want to talk about just this very narrow subset of issues, when Canadians are dealing with a whole host of concerns outside of that.
Yeah, and just curious, Pierre's position on cannabis, on psychedelic medicines? Like traditionally, conservatives have been, they've advocated less for cannabis and also for psychedelic medicines. Do you know if Pierre is for that, against that, or maybe he hasn't said much about it?
To be honest, I don't know. I do think, though, that you'd be hard pressed to find a conservative that wanted to roll back pot legalization. In fact, there was a lot of pot going around at the trucker convoy this past weekend. So I do think that that's an issue that's kind of a settled issue. I don't know where his stance on it is. And psychedelics, I haven't heard anyone in politics. I mean, I'm a shareholder in an upstart psychedelic company that just went public. So I am kind of a libertarian. Well, not kind of. I'm entirely a libertarian on this. I don't know where Pierre or other conservatives would be. My guess is that a lot of them probably just wouldn't talk about it because they don't want to just put a wedge in when the Canadian public is generally on side with it.
Okay, and I don't mean to keep harping on you about Pierre's views. I'm just kind of interested too. Do you know where he stands on police funding? Because I've taken the stance that if anything, we should actually increase police funding. Like, I think this defunding of the police is just completely silly, completely naive, completely childish. They've shown through statistics, if you look at Minneapolis, when they defunded their police, there was a 34% increase in homicide rate. It was the worst year in homicide rate, or second worst year in homicide rate in the country, in that city in its entire history. So do you know where his stance is on that?
I don't know, but I do recall, and I might be wrong about this, so maybe I should just back down before I say something wrong. But I'm pretty sure around the time that the defund the police protests and that line was becoming ubiquitous, Pierre Poilievre did speak out against it. I seem to have a vague recollection of that, but I've never heard him talk about defunding the police. In fact, the Conservatives have generally been pretty consistent about being pro-police, and I think that's probably something that would extend to Pierre as well. But again, I couldn't say definitively on that.
Okay, so just have to ask you a little bit about Trudeau, Andrew. So I mean, everyone, or most people, I think, thought it was pretty ridiculous and cowardly that a few days before the protests, he says that he needs to self-isolate, even though at that time he was not positive for COVID. He was triple vaccinated, and he said he was going to self-isolate for 5 days. And then all of a sudden, a few days later, he comes out and finally says something about the truckers convoy. Most people thought that that was a little bit of a media play, where just basically just to avoid questions and things like that. He did indeed test positive, so I guess he, we can't say that he was lying about that. But do you feel that he's done the right thing in addressing the truckers convoy? Because a lot of people are very, very upset about him using the words fringe Canadians. So what do you think? What are your thoughts on his overall messaging to Canadians on this convoy?
Well, the rhetoric has kept ramping up. Last week, he said it's a fringe minority with unacceptable views. Now, last weekend, I should have mentioned this earlier, that was just a huge punchline. Everyone had signs saying proudly part of the fringe, or, I have unacceptable views. When people were speaking to this massive, massive crowd in the freezing cold, they're saying it's great to be here in front of the fringe minority. So this was something that people actually reclaimed, as they say, as somewhat of a point of pride. And then on Monday, Justin Trudeau comes out and he says, these are Nazis, these are racist. And that was more likely to inflame any violence or tension than anything that was happening there already. And the messaging from the Liberals has gone to, yeah, this is annoying and we don't agree with these people, to they're all hateful, racist, Nazi sympathizing bigots. And the danger in that, if it's not evident, is that you are maligning an entire population. You're saying that this group doesn't have a right to speak out. And you're laying the groundwork for confrontations between protesters and police, or, as we're hearing is possible, protesters and military potentially, because the Ottawa police is basically saying, we don't think we can handle this anymore. So I think that's a big, big risk that Justin Trudeau has created. And it was funny, though, because he's talking about it as though we have this giant, 1,000-person strong Klan rally taking place in front of Parliament Hill. Yet I note today on his itinerary, he's having a Zoom photo op with a Regina donut shop. If your country is crumbling under a rise of racist hate, fascism, a Zoom call with a donut shop doesn't seem like it should be at the top of the agenda. So I think the Liberals are trying to, for their own reasons, pretend there's a problem here, when in reality, it's a problem for them, not for the country.
Yeah, I think you said that very, very well. It's a problem for them, not for the country. And I mean, like you said, and like so many people have said, there's very, very few people there that were, doing things that were, unlawful, or things that, we certainly wouldn't, condone. So, I think that what he's doing now is he's trying to, capitalize on this, 1% or less of people. And I think that some people, or most people actually, are seeing through it. Like, of course, they're doubling down on this narrative that there's Nazi flags there and things like that. But it seems like it is, in my opinion anyways, backfiring a little bit, and people are starting to see through it. And I think that he did a very poor job of addressing the truckers convoy, both in timing and in his words. He shouldn't have waited several days. It should have been something he was addressing right away. And then also, by calling this the fringe minority, he's actually creating more division in Canadians instead of creating more unity. And as you mentioned, several times throughout the show, Andrew, that people at that convoy were all about unity. They weren't about division. And he's trying to say the exact opposite. So, I'm sort of, hopefully someone from the Liberal Party soon will speak out and say that they actually do support the convoy, and that maybe that, Justin Trudeau did speak out of turn and use, incorrect words and said things that offended people. So, I don't know if there's been much rumblings in the Liberal Party about, anything against Justin Trudeau or how he's handled this matter. But, I wouldn't be surprised if someone did soon come out and say, from the Liberal Party, and indicate that, they're not in support of what their leader has done in the past few days, and that they do not support calling Canadians, who are standing up for their rights, the fringe minority with unacceptable views.
Yeah, and I would add to that, even if someone were going to say, or not going to say that we support the convoy, to at least say these are people that have come here with a message. They've clearly got momentum. I agree to hear them out. That's all. That's all. I mean, obviously that would be lukewarm for the truckers who want results, but not vilifying them would be the step. Not calling them racist would be a much more positive step towards discourse here that would be healthy for the country.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous how he's grouping all these people together. So, he's basically saying like anyone who supports the truckers convoy is racist, when in reality, it's probably less than 1% of the truckers convoy that are, doing or saying racist things. And, I think Pierre made this point recently that, like, we all know about Justin having all these blackface costumes, and he says he doesn't even know how many times he's kind of done this. So, if you are by association saying that anyone in the truckers convoy is racist because of this small 1%, then by the same logic, which is again ridiculous, you could say that anybody who supports Justin Trudeau or the Liberal Party is also racist because of his actions. But just because Justin Trudeau had these blackface costumes, I don't believe that everyone in the Liberal Party is racist. And he's saying that just because, there's this small amount of people, less than 1% likely in the truckers convoy, that are racist, he's saying that everyone attached to that party is racist, which is also equally ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that's valid. And it was Pierre Poilievre that tried to make that point. And then also Arnold Beerson, a conservative MP, introduced a motion in the House, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, condemning blackface, and the Liberals wouldn't give it unanimous consent. So I do think there's a huge double standard taking place here. And ultimately, bad actors are going to try to extrapolate from the very worst to define the whole. And I do think that Canadians will hopefully see through that.
Yeah, I certainly hope that they see through it too, as well. But anything else in the truckers convoy that we didn't cover in this conversation, Andrew, that you felt people should know about?
Yeah, I think that the one point I would raise here is that it's important to not succumb to political tribalism. There were lots of people that were all for rail blockades and port blockades when they were anti-pipeline, but are saying this is the most terrible thing. How dare they block critical infrastructure? And similarly, there are people on the right that were very much against blockades against pipelines, but are now saying, yeah, well, this one's fine because it's different. So I do think that consistency needs to be important here. I was a supporter of the convoy. I'm going to be perfectly candid. I have a lot of issues with some of the disruptive elements, like what we saw at the Coutts border crossing out in Alberta. But the point that I've rallied behind, and I think most Canadians have rallied behind, is the message itself of the convoy, which is a group of people rising up to say, we're just fed up. And whatever individualities or nuances individual people might bring to this, generally speaking, it's a rally of the people saying, you know what, government's gone too far this time.
And and to that point too, I mean, it seems like they have done a good job. Like, they're not being necessarily credited for this, but since the truckers convoy has started, and I'm going to forget some things on the list, but Erin O'Toole has been ousted from the party, which again we think has been linked to the truckers convoy. Quebec has now said that they're going to scrap the vax tax, which was silly to begin with. I had David Fright on the show fairly recently, one of the members of the PPC party who lives in Quebec. He's a Montreal based lawyer, and he thought it was basically just a ploy to basically get people to get vaccinated. So a couple big things have happened, and then Saskatchewan also said, I think, that they're going to lift their restrictions by the end of February. So I think that some of these announcements are indeed tied to the convoy, but the convoy is not necessarily really getting the credit for it. But there is quite a bit of momentum now, it appears. And you feel that because of the convoy and because of this momentum, that other provinces, hopefully Ontario, where we're living, will also ease restrictions and mandates in the near future.
I think so. I mean, BC made a comment, BC's health advisor, that they're working towards lifting. Alberta came out, Jason Kenney, on, I think it was Tuesday, that said Alberta was hoping by the end of the month to be in a position to start a multi-stage lifting. Now, what a lot of people are going to say here is that, well, they would have been doing this anyway, but I don't think you can discount the convoy effect, which has galvanized people and proven that people are no longer willing to comply. Like I mentioned, and my tweet's up to like over 30,000 likes now, that the mask mandate in Ottawa was basically dead as of last weekend because no one was following it. So hotels and stores and restaurants that were open had given up trying to enforce it. Now, whether that's your idea of a solid idea for a protest, to just walk into stores and not wear a mask notwithstanding, the point is that these rules are nothing if people don't abide by them. And I think that's the problem governments are facing right now. It delegitimizes their existence as governments if their rules aren't being followed and they don't have the ability to enforce it. So a lot of them, I think their hands are being forced into lifting some of these.
So, okay, I knew a little bit about that, Andrew, but I didn't know quite the extent that you're explaining it. So last weekend, when people were going into various bars, restaurants, hotels, they were not necessarily always enforcing masks. Is that correct?
I would say they were never enforcing
Okay.
masks.
Okay.
As far as the places I saw firsthand, again, there were incidents elsewhere where I'm sure you had staff that were trying to put masks on people. I was staying at a hotel where I think the entire hotel was booked up by convoy supporters. The staff were wearing masks. No one else was. They were walking through the lobbies, into the elevators, through the hallways, completely unmasked, and no one was doing anything about it. Same as a couple of food places that I went into. So generally speaking, and again, I don't know the motivation. Were they saying that we don't want confrontation, or were they saying at this point it doesn't matter? I don't know. But the point is the volume of people that just weren't following trumped the public health ordinances.
So they weren't even asking you guys to put masks on. They were just kind of like let you guys be as normal.
And in fairness, I did. I wore my
Yeah.
mask through the lobby into the elevator because
Yeah.
my view on this has been that my grievance is not with businesses, but it's
Yeah.
with the government itself. So I
Yeah.
did my part, as we're supposed to be patting ourselves on the back for. But no, everyone else, they were just not saying a thing to about it.
Very, very interesting. Well, I can see how that can gain quite a bit of momentum. I wonder, if that's going to expand, beyond Ottawa. Have there been any other places other than the truckers convoy where people have been, starting to, basically just been less strict with masking?
I don't know. I've heard anecdotally about some places in Alberta that have just not really cared all that much. I saw just yesterday on Instagram a local pizza place near you and I in London that decided that they just were preemptively saying, if you have a mask exemption, you don't need to tell us anything. You can just walk in and no questions asked. So I do think that people are starting to tire of this, and I think the convoy perhaps is maybe jostling a few more people into that civil disobedience column.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right that, people are growing tired of this. Because one, point I wanted to make, I know we only have less than 10 minutes left or so here, is that there was a poll that came out fairly recently. I don't know the exact source of it, but it appeared that things had shifted where more than 50% of Canadians either agreed or strongly agree that we should remove all vaccine mandates. And again, I don't know the source, but they did indicate that I think that at the beginning of January, so just a month ago, that it was actually only about 40% total either strongly agreed or agreed that we should lift vaccine mandates. So I do see there being quite a bit of a shift overall, and I think right now, like, we're really on this like pivotal point where people are where we do have probably more people now, based on that poll, who are actually against vaccine mandates. So, I can see how, you may see more and more stores open up. And like you said, once there's just, so much pressure, that kind of takes away the power that the government has once they're no longer in control of the majority of the population. And the majority of the population now, from this poll, indicates that they are actually opposed to vaccine mandates.
Yeah, and that was, I believe, the Angus Reid poll that showed that swing. And I think that was very positive for me, because I've been very pessimistic that I've thought Canadians by and large have been welcoming a lot of these restrictions in. And Canadians have been asking the government, no, lock us down more, no, mandate us more. And I think in a lot of cases that was probably pushing governments to be so full-throated in their supports of things like vaccine passports and whatnot. But I do think the tide is turning, and I don't know if it's just because of fatigue. I don't know if some of the protests have been pushing people. I don't know if it's just been because of the instability of it, that you think you're reopening and then bam, you're getting another round of restrictions. But whatever the case is, I certainly think the tide is turning now, and I think that momentum is going to keep up.
Yeah, I think it's going to keep up too. And I think a lot of people, anticipate it, there being no more lockdowns once we, got to maybe 70 to 80% of, of a vaccination. And now it seems like, we're approaching like 80 to 90%, on people who are, single dose or double dose and with the vaccine. I think even with the boosters now in Ontario, it might even be close to 50%. And the majority of those people are the people who are more at risk. So, over 50 years old, particularly people who are over, 75 and 80 years old. I think a lot of those people have received their booster. And then in addition to that, we've never really had mass vaccination plus mass infection at the same time. And, I certainly believe in natural immunity. There's been multiple studies that have shown that it's incredibly efficacious. Of course, you can get reinfected, but it's very, very low. It's like less than like 1%. So, natural immunity appears to be very effective. So, I hope I'm not being hopelessly, optimistic here. I've kind of been, I guess, a little bit like that throughout the whole pandemic, just because I want it to end. But, at this point, we have mass vaccination, we have mass infection, which is resulting in, mass natural immunity. We also have, new medicines that are coming on. Like, I know a lot of people are certainly, not happy with Pfizer right now. And I can certainly understand that. But, this new drug that they have, from the clinical trials, it appears to be incredibly efficacious and also safe as well. So, there's lots of, and then, the truckers convoy and people's just, change of opinion and change of mind on this subject. So I don't think we have all of this ever at one time before. So, again, that's what is giving me a little bit of hope right now. And I could see, us being in a very, very different place over the next 1 to 2 months. Sometimes things can change rapidly. And, we got into this pandemic very, very quickly. And, maybe again, I am being, hopelessly optimistic, but I do think there are real valid reasons why it also may end fairly quickly as well. And when I mean end, I mean the mandates will end. I don't mean that COVID will end. I think that, COVID zero is a very silly, naive strategy. It's just something that people like to say to make themselves feel good and a virtue signal. But in reality, this is probably going to be here forever. And we just need to learn to live with it. Even, Dr. Kieran Moore, our chief medical officer in Ontario, said that recently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, it may sound like a point that goes against science, which is not my intent here, but I've said that the pandemic is over when people say it is. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the restrictions we've seen have decreasing bearing on the pandemic itself and on the virus. As we've seen mass vaccination plus declining severity in the Omicron wave, yet an increase in restrictions in some places like Ontario. So I do think the approaches we're seeing in places like the UK and Denmark and Ireland and now Finland are becoming the norm. That's a very small list, 4 countries, and I could count them all again on one hand that are opening, and that's it. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done now, and we'll see that, and I think we're going to see more of it. But I do think that it's impossible to separate the public resistance to these measures from when these measures are eventually lifted.
Yeah, it'll be very, very interesting, I think, to see what plays out over the next month or two. Unfortunately, Andrew, we're actually all out of time there now. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today. You provided a lot of great insight on a lot of political issues, and particularly on the truckers convoy. So thank you so much for coming on. Can you just please tell the audience where they can find you online? I know that I follow you on Twitter, but where else can they find you besides Twitter, Andrew?
So my show is at andrewlawtonshow.com, and you can also subscribe to my newsletter over at andrewlawton.substack.com. I'm very original with names, if you haven't been able to tell.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on the show. Be happy to have you back on again in the future, and we'll chat again soon.
I'd love that. Thanks very much.